And welcome to our Celebrate Earth Day webinar. I'm Kristen Legler. I'm Senior Education Specialist at PBS Wisconsin, and it is a privilege to be here today. The arrival of COVID-19 has changed our lives individually and collectively. What hasn't changed is PBS Wisconsin's commitment to you. We have a commitment to support teachers in sparking curiosity and setting their students on a lifelong journey of learning. I am going to share my screen with you right now. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood broadcast on PBS for 31 years. Mr. Rogers said, "The most important people in a child's life are parents and teachers. That means parents and teachers are the most important people in the world." At PBS Wisconsin, we couldn't agree more. We believe that teachers are among the most influential people in children's lives. You are their mentors, their guides, and their tireless champions. Thank you. This week's webinar is extra special. Tia Nelson joins us to talk about teaching environmental literacy and sustainability. Tia is an internationally recognized assiduous advocate for environmental stewardship and climate change education. She spent 17 years with the Nature Conservancy as policy director for Latin America. Tia was the first director of the Global Climate Change Initiative. For this work, she received the Environmental Protection Agency's Climate Protection Award in 2000. Tia returned home to Wisconsin to serve as executive secretary to Wisconsin's Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, which included a gubernatorial appointment as co-chair of Wisconsin's Task Force on Global Warming. Tia is currently a managing director at Outrider. She's the daughter of former U.S. Senator and Governor Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day. It is my pleasure to welcome Tia to this webinar. Tia, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for your important work.
So I have questions that I'm going to ask Tia, and I imagine some of you will have questions too. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and my colleague, Muna Al-Gahethi, will share them with Tia when I'm done with my questions. So Tia, what led your papa to create Earth Day 50 years ago?
Oh, well, I think that journey for him started when he was a little boy, growing up in Clear Lake, Wisconsin. Nature was his playground, and his affection for the natural world and ecology was imbued in him at a very young age. He was inspired at age 10, and after watching a speech of Robert La Follette Jr.'s from the shoulders of my grandfather in Amory, Wisconsin, which was the county seat of Polk County, to run for the United States Senate when he was 10. He decided that's what he wanted to do, to grow up and be a public servant and help people. And he became governor and became renowned as governor for his bold conservation initiatives. And then he was elected to the Senate and came to Washington, thinking that he could persuade his colleagues to talk about the environmental challenges of the day. At the time, there was no Clean Air Act, no Clean Water Act, no Environmental Protection Agency. Smog plagued every major city in America. Most of the rivers, the big rivers of were unfishable and unswimmable, and he was unsuccessful in persuading others to care about it. He appealed to President Kennedy in 1963, a few months before the president was assassinated, to launch a conservation tour, which was a failure and a deep disappointment to him. I mean, the president embarked on the journey. It just didn't turn out the way my father had hoped. And in the years that followed between 1963 and 1969, he kept trying to think of an idea, and he went out to Santa Barbara to inspect an oil spill, then the largest oil spill in American history that had ravaged the coasts of California. And he got on an airplane and picked up a magazine and read about how teach-ins on college campuses, anti-war teach-ins on college campuses, were changing the national narrative on the morality of the Vietnam War. And he decided to call for an environmental teach-in and gave a speech in which he asked teachers across the country to teach on the environment. And it took off like gangbusters and was successful beyond his wildest dreams.
And here we are, 50 years later, with a group of teachers anxious to hear more and to learn more. I think it's absolutely astounding that age 10, he knew what he wanted to do. And the impact he had on our world is incredible.
Yeah.
And that world is ever changing. As educators, we're preparing students for a future that we can't even imagine ourselves. What message do you have for educators teaching environmental literacy and sustainability today?
Well, Outriders made a film using archival footage of my father's and the voice of Varshini Prakash, a climate change youth activist, and Bob Inglis, a conservative Republican who used to be a climate skeptic and has now dedicated himself to climate change and specifically works to reach out to young Republicans. And so Varshini and Bob sort of bookend the story that I wanted to tell, which was the first Earth Day was I'm sorry, my mother can't get up and answer the phone, and the caregiver just walked out the door.
That's okay. We'll wait for you. And friends, while we're waiting for Tia to get back, I'll tell you about when I was a third grade teacher. I used to have my students, the week leading up to Earth Day, I had my students, I had the custodian in our school, Dave Pace, not empty our trash bins or our recycling bins for 1 week. And on Earth Day, we weighed the waste that we had and the recycling that we had collected. And then I encourage my students not to toss away as much and to use less, and actually to recycle more. And then a week later, we weighed the trash and recycling again. And so we were able then to calculate the difference. And as we're going through today's webinar, I invite you to share a tip or a teaching idea that you have for Earth Day in the chat. And now, Tia, back to you with your story.
Yeah, thanks. So what I want kids of today to know, and I hope you can share the link to our film. It's about 7 minutes. Is that individual action matters in the way that you've just described, having an awareness of one's personal impact and footprint on the earth. And there are so many teaching opportunities around that. I'll come back to a couple of them in just a minute, but it was the collective action of at the grassroots level of individuals who created the social and political will for the environmental decade. More environmental laws were passed after the first Earth Day than any other time in American history. And I want kids to understand both that they personally have a impact in the choices they make and how they walk about the earth, but that collectively using our voices, demanding leadership, holding ourselves accountable, operating from our own place of values is meaningful and impactful and can change the world in unimaginable ways. And Earth Day was that for my father. I think of other very quiet single acts of protest from a place of principle that changed the course of American history. Rosa Parks simply saying the word no and refusing to move to the back of the bus during a time of segregation changed the trajectory of the civil rights movement. And a more contemporary example is Greta Thunberg, a young kid with a lot of challenges. She has Asperger's and was suffering from severe anxiety and depression. And her single act of protest sitting in front of the Swedish parliament launched a global climate youth movement. And that outcome would have been unimaginable to her, as would Rosa Parks' actions and outcomes have been unimaginable to her, just as my father's simple act of calling for an environmental teach-in precipitated something successful beyond his wildest dreams. So my biggest goal in life now is to give kids a sense of agency, that what they do matters and that they can make a difference and unimaginable things can happen. There's a book that it could serve as an interesting resource. Some of it would not be for the younger kids because it's technically complicated. But there's some really interesting things in it. It's called Project Drawdown. It ranks the 100 top climate change solutions. Who knew? Even I didn't know. And would be a fun one to teach around that. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the world after the United States and China. And, only in a rich country, we throw away 30 to 40% of the food produced in this country. And that wastes all the energy inputs that went into producing that food, but also then that food goes into the landfill and through the process of decay in an anaerobic environment, produces methane gas, a very potent greenhouse gas. So, and that doesn't take a lot of sacrifice. I compost at home, have my own little vegetable garden, but there are some really surprising solutions that kids can get involved with. Food waste would be one. Reducing the use of single-use plastic and understanding that there is no way. When people say they're throwing something away, there is, there's no way, right? It has to go somewhere. And in the case of single-use plastic, lots of energy inputs into it, and then the decay process again releases greenhouse gases, and the microplastics that come from the decay of that material then pollute our waters and harm our wildlife and our humans alike.
I noticed that Muna put a link to the book in the chat. Thank you. And we'll get the link to the film the Outrider film that Tia talked about in the link too.
Yeah, outrider.org/Earth Day.
I have a link to the film in the chat box as well.
Okay.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Muna's on top of it. So thank you so much, Muna. So Tia, you talked about creating a sense of agency for kids, and in the Wisconsin biography about your dad, when students engage with that media, they're going to learn about your dad's vision for the planet and hopefully be inspired to think about their own vision for the planet. How can the teachers that are listening here today, how can we support students to help them make their visions come true?
Well, there's any number of entry points, and I think one of the beauties of Earth Day was that my father didn't prescribe any particular pathway, but encouraged people to take action on the things that they cared about and that they were concerned about in their own communities. And, some people protested, some people cleaned up trash, some people planted trees, some people had concerts, some people wrote their congressman. My father published a book, and we're publishing on the Outrider website on that Earth Day landing page. It'll go up today or tomorrow, a story called Letters from Children. The first Earth Day, children from all over the country wrote my father, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, expressing their concerns about a whole slew of issues, sometimes including artwork. I remember an image of Charlie the tuna. Remember that was a marketing strategy for tuna fish that was popular in my day. I'm 63. Charlie the tuna strangling, but there was a really brilliant one in which a kid drew an ambulance that had no pollution coming out of its tailpipe, and above it said 300 miles. And I wonder, did that kid end up at, Tesla or General Motors designing an electric vehicle? But there was beautiful art and letters, expressions of concern on the part of kids. My father was so touched by it, he published it in a book called Letters from Children. What are you and me going to do? I hired a writer to track down some of those children and find them today. Most of them are around my age, approximately.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many of them remember the day or writing the letter to my father, or whether my father wrote them back. Some of them went into careers around the environment. And part of my point is that there's just so many opportunities from basic ecological lessons to food waste to writing your congressman. Just because you don't have the opportunity to vote because you're not of voting age yet doesn't mean that they're all future voters and they're all constituents. And those letters had a big impact on my dad. And like I said, the story will be published within the next 12 hours. And it's kind of fun. And you'll see the kids' artwork. It's very inspiring. And I go and talk to schools a lot because it makes me happy. The Cambridge Elementary School is one of my favorite. It's not far from Madison, and they've got a big commitment to the environment there. They compost all their food waste in the cafeteria. They have a school garden. They have a little forest where they do ecological experiments. They have an ecology club. And they also have a study of biographies of Wisconsinites, including my dad. So part of my point is, there's any number of things from writing your congressman to learning about food waste to, I still threaten at my office. I haven't done it yet because it'll take a little work to, they say, I'm like the trash police around there sorting, recyclables out of the, it's like, hey, we need to lead by example here, people. And I want to get a worm farm for our food waste in the office, which is creeping out a couple of my fellow staff people, but it'd be a real fun one for the kids, right?
Oh, I think it'd be great. Absolutely.
You can buy a little kit online for, get your worms.
All right.
Food waste in there, and then you got good potting soil.
That's a great teaching idea. I see my colleague Mia smiling up in the corner. Sounds like you're going to be getting out and getting those worms, Mia. Awesome. All right, Tia. I've got a coronavirus question for you. It's changed the way we're living today. And at times I've felt despair, and I've heard from other teachers that they are feeling similarly. But one thing that hasn't changed is that Earth Day is about celebrating. It's about celebrating the earth and our successes. How do you stay hopeful, inspired, and motivated?
Yeah, well, that's we live in challenging times, no doubt, and I call it my own complicated dance between hope and despair. I just come back to the story I started with, that the first Earth Day was successful beyond my father's wildest dreams. A very simple idea to ask teachers to teach about the environment, change the course of American history. And he couldn't have known that. And the power of individual action, so well demonstrated by someone who just got up in the morning every day, undeterred by failures and setbacks and challenges, to each day work to make the world a better and brighter place. And that in doing so, he left his mark on history. And that to me is the most hopeful and important story to remind myself of, that we do all have that power, and it's unimaginable, and you can't know the outcome, but you have to get up and operate from your place of values and do what you feel is important, and to know that beautiful and unimaginable things can come from it.
Thank you for those inspirational words. Muna, are there any questions for Tia? And you are muted. Do I have
Yes.
to? Okay.
Now I just unmuted. There is one question so far, and everyone else on the call, please feel free to add your questions to the chat box. And it is the question is from Miley, and she's wondering about the actor Mark Ruffalo. He's very involved with environmental protests and anti-fracking and such. And she's wondering if he ever reached out or was in contact with your father, Gaylord.
Oh, I don't know. My father passed away in 2004, it was. I met Mark at a political event in Madison for, who the heck was it for? Some progressive who cared about the environment. He was very sweet, very articulate, but I have no idea whether my father ever met him. I do remember I was with my father when Ed Begley Jr. and Leonardo DiCaprio were at, I think it was the 25th anniversary of Earth Day. Mm-hmm. And I was with my dad on the Washington Mall, and it would be hard to show you the picture room, and for most of these references wouldn't mean a lot to a younger audience, but Jimmy Durante and Henry Fontaine and looking to Theo Backel, they are all once famous actors, now long gone, but Papa was around a long time. He was also a charming, popular guy. So there were a lot of, but he was still, his biography is called The Man from Clear Lake. The guy who wrote it said, I probably should have come up with a sexier title, but it seemed perfectly appropriate because for all of his recognition and accomplishments in life, at the end of the day, he was just a little boy from a little town in northern Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. For anyone else on the call, we have about another minute or so with Ms. Nelson. So if you have any questions, now is your chance.
Yeah, then I got to go get Mom dinner. I'm an hour ahead of you. I got stuck in D.C., which it ain't a bad thing. At least I got a good job in my sequestered space, mm-hmm. taking care of my 97-year-old mom.
Wow. Yeah. I just wanted to say that I remember the very first first Earth Day. I was going to school in Portage, and we went outside and had kind of a rally. It felt sort of like it felt like we were kind of somehow protesting. I don't know exactly how that is. And we planted a tree, but I just so remember that experience because I think it kind of went with that time where people were, doing a lot of protesting, and we're trying to get the awareness out there of issues. And I just remember thinking that our generation was going to make such a big difference in this whole world because
here's one important thing to keep in mind because well, there's a couple, and I want to close with a quote from my dad. But just, protecting the environment and forging a sustainable society between the species of humans and a finite planet and the other species that are dependent on this finite planet. That effort to forge a sustainable society, that will never be over. We will never win. That is a journey. It is not a destination. He has always thought it would take decades, long, sustained moral, political, financial commitment beyond anything we've ever done, and one that continues on decade after decade, as long as the human species is seeking to find balance and well-being with the earth. We will be in this challenge and struggle, and the question is how well we do at it. And the other, there was an important lesson that I don't think was much talked about and has only recently become a part of the environmental discussion, that I think is hugely important. And it's in the film, a film clip, and I found a print version here in the bookshelf, and it really sunk in on me. My father said, and like I said, this is in the film, ecology is a big science, not a narrow science. It involves the worst environments in America, in the inner cities and in Appalachia. In the print version, he goes on to say, it involves rats in the ghetto and public housing unworthy of its name. Ecology is a big science. And so his call to action had this significant social and environmental justice element that I don't think the environmental community embraced at the time. I think that was is something that is increasingly getting the attention it deserves. Better late than never. It's not enough, but it's a really important element. The environment isn't the park over there. The environment is everywhere. And ecology is, as my father said in that speech, a big science. And it involves every environment in which humans are interacting with this world. And that to me is a really important lesson.
Thank you.
Tia, your dad was a national treasure, and so are you. Oh, that's very sweet of you. Well, teachers are the most important in the world, and they, their response to my father's call to action was a critical part of making the first Earth Day. So I'm grateful to all of you, very grateful to all of you. And I love the PBS biography series for kids. And if there's anything I can ever do for you guys, let me know. And when I have the time, once I get through this, I do like coming to schools, and I have a slide deck with the images from that book I told you guys about, Letters from Children. What are you and me going to do? The kids like to see that, and I like to encourage them. It's a good way to connect environment and civic lessons, and teach them at an early age to use their voice, and ask their elected officials to listen. We have another project, Tia, called Let's Talk About Election 2020, where students in middle school and in high school are being asked to create a 2 to 3 minute video or podcast to share what they think are the important issues in the upcoming election. And it's a wonderful opportunity for kids to share their voice, kids that can't yet vote. Yeah. I saw Victoria. Hi, Victoria. I just saw something pop into the chat room. Victoria, I hope you can go to our website and grab that Letters from Children article we just published. Or maybe it's not on there yet. Maybe it's going up tonight or tomorrow morning. But it's a real inspiration, and it's my father published the letters from these kids. He thought it was so powerful, and now we've tracked some of them down and had them tell their stories and show their art. The biggest challenge for that story was not finding the kids, though that was a challenge. They're not kids now; they're grown-ups. But getting the darn
publisher, the person who now, the publishing house that owns the rights to those images, because they're so damn precious. And I wanted to use them with the article. We just got permission. We've been at it 6 months, a couple days ago. So there's some really fun art in there. The kids should love it.
I unmuted you, Victoria.
Okay, I will add that to my teacher resource list that I've been sharing with educators around the state.
Victoria's work is so awesome. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm going to go hang out with Mom now. I've tested her patience. She didn't get to watch Dr. Phil all day.
Oh no. Tia, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. Okay, friends. Again, if you have a teaching tip or an idea, teaching idea for teaching about the environment, feel free to write it in the chat, and Muna is moderating that chat right now. So thank you. I am going to start sharing my screen with you. Voila. Muna, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, friends, tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and I'm going to share 3 media resources that you can use in your Earth Day curriculum in the upcoming week. You can access our content at pbswisconsineducation.org, and that's the page that I have on my screen right now. On our home screen, you'll see featured resources. We have an at-home learning collection that includes a curriculum-related broadcast programming schedule and supplemental resources. You may also click on the Browse by Resources tab for an alphabetical list of the content that we have available. Today, we're going to look at Wisconsin biographies. Wisconsin Biographies is a collection of stories about notable figures in Wisconsin's history that have truly made an impact in our world. The resource was designed for students in grades 3 through 8, and there are 15 stories in the collection. And during this webinar, you can follow my mouse. I will be highlighting things on the screen. And what you see right now is that I'm hovering over the story tab so that you can see the 15 biographies that are available in this collection. Using the Wisconsin biography resources for each story, students will be able to describe who this person is, what they did, why they are considered important, how did they change lives in the past and in the present, and what impact will their actions have on future generations. Each biography comes with a short animated video, 2 student interactives, one called Create an Idea Map and Design a Trading Card. There's a collection of print biographies and ebooks, a historical image collection, teaching tips, and now I'm back to the bottom right-hand side of the website, and there are additional resources, additional web resources shared. Let's look at Gaylord Nelson, A Vision for the Earth.
You hear the word ecology. That's a big science, not a narrow one. It's a big concept. And it is concerned with all the ramifications of all the relationships of all living creatures to each other and their environment.
This is me with my father. My name is Tia Nelson, and my dad was Gaylord Nelson. He is known as the father of Earth Day, a vision he had for teachers all across the country to talk about the environment. Maybe you've heard of Earth Day. Maybe you've even participated in an Earth Day event. Before he was the father of Earth Day, before he was my dad, he was a little boy growing up in Clear Lake in northern Wisconsin. He loved spending time outdoors, exploring the forests, lakes, and streams of the region. Nature was his playground. As he was growing up, he also got to know the world of civics and government through his parents.
And so I went to political meetings with my father and my mother from the time I was in grade school. Whenever a speaker came within driving distance in our Model T Ford, the way we went, 40, 50, 60 miles sometimes, just to hear somebody, hear one of the La Follettes give a speech.
My father was inspired, and he started thinking about a future for himself, running for elected office. That stayed with him as he went to college and then law school, through his time in the U.S. Army during World War II. When he came back to Wisconsin, he was ready to get his career in politics going. He ran for the state Senate and then for governor of Wisconsin. As governor, he worked on government reform, social justice causes, and environmental issues. He created new jobs for young people, designated lands for public parks, and worked to conserve our beautiful lakes and rivers. He accomplished a lot for the people of Wisconsin, and he wanted to make an even bigger impact. So he ran for the U.S. Senate to represent Wisconsin citizens in the nation's capital. And he won. But when he got to Washington, D.C., he found out that others in government just didn't seem to care about the environment as much as he did. A national conservation tour with President Kennedy didn't accomplish what he hoped it would. And few senators would support the laws that he proposed to protect our environment. Some years later, he went to visit the site of an oil spill and was devastated by the damage he saw. On the plane ride home, he read an article about anti-war teach-ins on college campuses. That's when he got an idea.
Teach-ins on the campuses, teach-ins on the Vietnam War. And I thought, that's a good idea. Why can't we have a nationwide, quote, teach-in on the environment? That's where the concept of Earth Day came from.
The idea for a teach-in about the environment started to spread well beyond my dad's original vision. And when the day came, April 22nd, 1970, people all over the country participated. That day, the first Earth Day, marked the start of many changes to come over the next 10 years. They passed laws to keep pollution out of the air and water, so many laws that it became known as the Environmental Decade. My father was elected to 3 terms, serving 18 years in the U.S. Senate. Even after he was finished, he never stopped fighting for the environment. When asked at the age of 88 why he still went to work every day, he said, "Because the job's not done." And he's right. There's still so much more to do.
I don't think there's any other issue viewed in its broadest sense, which is as critical to mankind as the issue of the quality of the environment in which we live.
Earth Day lives on, as does the need to protect and care for the place we call home. Each of us has the power to help make the world a better place. It's up to you and me to do our part.
It was so awesome hearing from Tia tell her story of her dad's life and hearing how it connects with this biography. Below the biography, you see a collection of historical photos. Historical photos are a text too. If I were in the classroom, I would ask my students to examine these photos. Look at the people and the objects and the activities. Based on what you observe, what might you infer from this photo? What questions do you still have? And really important, where can you find the answers to those questions? The biographies are written at 3 different reading levels. Let me open up level 2 here. Notice that the biographies have a glossary, a table of contents, historical photos, and subtext. And the vocabulary is in bold print. When you click on the Teacher tab, on the right-hand side, you'll find a category called Teaching Tips, where there are story summaries and guiding questions for each of the biographies. I'll give you a moment to look over the guiding questions for the Gaylord Nelson biography. This is where you'll also find the academic standards. You'll notice that this resource connects with social studies standards, English language arts standards, and of course, the environmental literacy and sustainability standards. And when I was talking about the biographies, the print biographies, I think I forgot to tell you that they are also available from iTunes as an ebook. And here's the reading Lexile key. Okay. The interactives are a great way to check for students' understanding. Let's look at create an idea map. Students have the opportunity to demonstrate their understanding of the research that they've done on the person that they're studying. They can explain their understanding in a web, a topic chart, cause and effect, plot diagram, Venn diagram, timeline. Here's some examples of student work. Creating these charts is very easy. The first thing your students do is they select the type of chart that they want to create. They can adjust their chart, and then they just need to add text. So starting with the main idea. The environment was a top priority for Gaylord Nelson. And then they need to add supporting details. And I think my favorite part of the idea mappers is when you get to add the pictures. They can click and drag artwork in. And what's really cool is they can add their own photographs. So I'm going to add a photo from my photo collections for the Nelson work to conserve lakes and water, to conserve lakes and rivers. Here's a photograph of me and my dad enjoying some time out on Lake Minocqua. When students are done with their idea mapper, they can email it to you. They can print it and hang it up on their bulletin board at home right now, or they can create a link and you can share it on your class website. And then there's the trading card app, where your students can demonstrate their understanding by creating a trading card. All right. So those are all of the resources available for each biography. I am delighted to share the Gaylord Nelson biography with you on the day before the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We have another story, a fairly new story in this collection called Millie Zanto. Recycling revolutionary. I'm going to show you just 1 minute of this video.
Have you ever flipped over a plastic bottle and seen a triangle with a number on the bottom? That little number is a clue to the story of Millie Zanto, a Wisconsinite whose ingenuity and activism changed recycling all over the world.
So Millie developed the idea for the numbering system to identify the plastics that are recycled here in Wisconsin, actually around the world. The numbering system is used worldwide, and Millie helped write Wisconsin's recycling laws. So I encourage you to check out her story after this webinar. I'm going to go back to PBS Wisconsin education.org, and I'll be back at my homepage. And now I'm going to click on a resource called Climate Wisconsin. Climate Wisconsin is an educational multimedia resource collection featuring stories about the impact of climate change here in Wisconsin. The Climate Wisconsin stories are from personal observation and experience and connect to climate change research. The stories are intended for students in grades 6 through 12. And when students investigate climate change in Wisconsin using the Climate Wisconsin the Climate Wisconsin videos, essays, and interactives, they'll deepen their understanding of climate change impact here in Wisconsin. There are 10 videos and 2 student interactives. The videos include a background essay and teaching tips. And I'm going to share Berkey Biner with you.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
Guns go off. Off you go. My name is John Kotar. I am one of the founders of the American Birkebeiner, and I am welcoming you to our race. Birkie is now a very different thing, really, than it was even in the early days. The growth of this race is almost impossible to comprehend. The first year, there were 35 starters, and this year we are crossing 8,000. It's a happening. It's an event far bigger than simply a ski event from here to there. I will tell you, the electricity, you will feel connectedness with others. Everybody's coming in with great excitement, anticipation, optimism about everything. And you can't help but being swept into this. You will see people ahead of you continuously, like a wall. You look back and unbelievable, this mass, this long snake is going as far as your eye can see. And yeah, I know the clock is running, so I don't loaf.
Banana, oranges.
Oh, thank you.
Bananas.
Banana.
So feed stations, of course, you're always anticipating. Grabbing a cup, ski pole still on, it's very clumsy. Mostly you'll spill everything.
Get your hot wax. It's free.
You got some 50 there?
We got blue and we have yellow, white. But they say the blue's been working best on the track.
Okay.
Good luck, guy.
Now you're aiming at those big hills and you're working hard, and I think it's up and down emotionally. You may have to slow down, you may have to stop. You are so fried that you can barely move, and yet you can. You find something else. Now you're going down. You're descending in one beautiful hill after another. Main Street is pulling you in. You slug through that sugar. It's packed with people.
James Daggett of Minneapolis, John Kotar of Eau Claire.
Not John Kotar. Hey, you guys, bib 90004 is wearing one of those magic red bibs. John is one of only 3 people to finish every single Birkebeiner. So,
there's always something connected to the Birkie. It is so much a way of life. Right now, it's almost unthinkable. But if we did lose this in a couple of decades, the loss would be horrendous. Cynical people might say, oh, come on, it's just a sport, skiing, big deal, there's something else. But it isn't just that. I would affect the region, the way they see this neck of the woods up here, so I try not to think about it all that much. We can have a race with 3-4 inches with the right temperature, but when the two combine, very little snow and higher temperature, then you really can't do it.
The background essay provides information about the Birkie race. It provides information about the economic impact that the race has for Sawyer County. And it talks about the warming trends observed by researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and how they impact the race. And if you look over to the right, you'll see some teaching questions. The first one reads, ask students if there are similar winter events or recreational opportunities in their community. Are the events being impacted by climate change? Second question reads, have students brainstorm possible adaptation strategies for the American Birkebeiner? How could they hold the race without adequate snow or cold temperatures? And then finally, the third question reads, using snowfall and temperature data from Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, have students predict what the Birkebeiner will have, have students predict when the Birkebeiner will have consistent weather-related challenges in holding the race. And then back to the Climate Wisconsin homepage, and I'd like to share the ice cover interactive with you. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison have been recording data about the formation and the melting of ice on Lake Mendota and Lake Monona since 1855. This interactive will help students explore the data and observe trends. They can look at the 10 longest seasons of ice cover, the 10 shortest, and then observe the trend. The data represented on this table is from 1855 through 2018.
Kristen, I just wanted to let you know there's about 7 minutes left.
Well, Muna, your timing is perfect because it is a wrap on my presentation, and I'm curious if there are any questions.
None are currently in the chat box.
Then I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to let you all know that I have recorded this webinar, and I will follow up with an email later this week that will have a link to the webinar. It'll also be on our events page at pbswisconsineducation.org/events. And so I'd like to thank all of you for sharing your day with me. And most of all, I want to thank you for the work that you are doing with students in Wisconsin. You are what making a difference looks like. Thank you, everyone.